He laughed while serving me divorce papers at my own office. Right there in front of my coworkers, smirking, like the years we spent together were just some long, cruel joke. But trust me, by the end of this story, he wasn't laughing anymore. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was halfway through presenting a design to my boss when I saw him walk in. Evan Holt, my husband of 7 years. He was dressed sharp, wearing that confident grin he always used when he was about to charm his way out of something. For a second, I thought maybe he'd come to surprise me with lunch. But when I saw the white envelope in his hand, my stomach twisted. "Lean across," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've been served." The room went silent. My coworkers stared as he placed the divorce papers on my desk. Then, unbelievably, he started laughing. He actually laughed. "Guess the honeymoon's really over," he said, turning toward my boss like it was some kind of joke. My boss forced a smile. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, and the floor under me felt like it was shaking. Evan looked around, enjoying the attention. "Don't worry, folks, she'll be fine. She always lands on her feet," he said with that same fake charm that used to make me melt. But not anymore. I finally noticed someone standing near the door, Tessa, my former intern. She was smiling too, though awkwardly, like she wasn't sure how to act. My chest burned. Evan walked over to her, slipped his arm around her waist, and said, "Come on, babe, let's go celebrate." Then they walked out. Just like that. Laughter trailing behind them. I stood there frozen, every pair of eyes in the room staring at me. My boss mumbled something about taking the rest of the day off. I didn't move for a long time. I kept staring at that envelope like it might explain why my husband, no, my ex, had turned into a stranger overnight. When I finally got home, the silence in our apartment was unbearable. His side of the closet was empty. His toothbrush was gone. Even the stupid mug that said "World's Best Husband" was missing. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading the papers over and over. There wasn't even a note, just a signature. Evan Holt. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I just sat there until my anger turned cold. That's when it hit me. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fall apart. He thought he could humiliate me and walk away laughing. Fine. Let him laugh. Because when I was done, he wouldn't have anything left to laugh about. When I first met Evan, he was broke and dreaming big. I was already working full-time as a junior architect, paying my own bills, living in a tiny apartment with more books than furniture. He told me he wanted to be a lawyer, but didn't have much left after tuition. I didn't even think twice before picking up extra design work at night. We made it through his law school years on ramen and late-night study sessions. I handled everything: the groceries, the rent, the laundry, the birthday gifts for his family. I believed in him more than he believed in himself. For years, I carried both of us. When he failed his first bar exam, I told him it didn't matter. When he finally passed, we celebrated with cheap champagne and a promise that things would get easier. And for a little while, they did. He landed a job at a small firm, started wearing crisp suits, and came home smelling like cologne instead of stress. I thought we were building something solid, something that would last. But after he made partner, he changed. The long hours turned into nights away from home. His phone became his new secret keeper. He started dressing like someone trying to impress strangers, not a wife waiting at home. I asked once if everything was okay. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Just work, Lena. You worry too much." I believed him because that's what good wives do, they trust. Then came the nights when he'd forget our dinners, the missed calls, the sudden bursts of anger when I asked simple questions. I tried harder, made his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, told myself it was just the pressure. I thought if I loved him enough, it would be enough. It wasn't until I stopped by his office one afternoon that I saw what had really changed. Tessa was there, my former intern, the girl I had once called Kiddo. She was laughing at something on his phone, her hand resting on his shoulder like she belonged there. When she noticed me, she froze. He didn't. He just said, "Oh, Lena, didn't expect you." That was all. No guilt, no explanation, just that same calm arrogance. The truth unfolded fast after that. Tessa had been helping him with contracts, staying late, assisting with cases. I'd trained her, trusted her, treated her like family. The betrayal wasn't just from him, it came from both sides. That night, I went home to a place that suddenly felt like a museum of my own foolishness. The framed wedding photo, the wine glasses from our anniversary, the half-empty bottle of his cologne on the dresser. It all felt like props from someone else's life. I sat on the couch, twisted the ring off my finger, and set it on the coffee table. The sound it made was soft, final. "You want to play games?" I whispered into the quiet room. "Fine. I play better." She didn't explode. She folded the shock into a neat, dangerous quiet, and walked out of the apartment like she'd always known what to do next. Instead of calling or confronting, she booked a meeting with someone who dealt in facts, not drama, Miles Brenner, a man who moved in the shadows and left no footprint. He listened without judgment, then nodded and said he could help. Miles worked clean. He trailed accounts, followed paper trails, and watched patterns that mean more than words. He found transfers that didn't add up, money that had been moved overnight into an unfamiliar account, purchases listed under vague company names, deeds recorded in shells. He showed her spreadsheets and marked lines with a steady hand. Each reveal was a small hammer blow that, to her, felt like justice taking shape. She began to collect everything that could be used later. Receipts, email headers, scanned statements, screenshots of calendar entries. She saved voicemails and printed text. She made copies of contracts and pulled public filing. When something was digital, she archived it twice. When it was paper, she photographed it. The apartment became a map of evidence, folders stacked in order, color-coded and labeled in handwriting that had stopped shaking. Her anger cooled into calculation. Nights that once held tears now held lists and plans. She memorized legal deadlines, learned how marital property was defined in her state, and even read up on corporate disclosure rules. It didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like defense. If he had been careful, she would be more careful. If he had hidden things, she would uncover them. If he had used their shared life as a ladder, she would dismantle each rung. Miles kept reporting in small doses, so she wouldn't get overwhelmed. Joint savings moved here, he'd say. A trust under that name. A shell company owning that condo. Each discovery was a step toward restoring what had been taken, and then some. She didn't gloat. She filed, recorded, and stored. She prepared for court in a quiet voice and in a precise wardrobe, chosen less for comfort than for a presence that spoke competence. Her aim wasn't noise. It wasn't public spectacle or petty revenge. It was to neutralize the advantage he thought he had, to make the outcome reflect the truth of what had happened behind closed doors. Everything she gathered was proof, not ammunition for gossip. When the time came, she would present it calmly, with lawyers and ledgers not shouting. In the meantime, she rebuilt small parts of her life that had been on hold. She took back late nights at the drafting table, met with former collaborators, and reopened clients she had let slide. Each professional step was part of the plan. Quietly, methodically, she turned humiliation into leverage. She had been made small in a room full of people. Now she prepared to be unignorable in a room that mattered. Evan didn't hide anymore. He paraded Tessa through restaurants, charity events, and firm gatherings like she was his trophy. Pictures of them started appearing in local newsletters, and word traveled fast through the professional circles Lena moved in. When she entered a room, conversations dipped for a moment before picking back up with polite sympathy. People offered soft smiles and half-hearted reassurances. She nodded through it all, quiet and detached, letting them believe she was the heartbroken wife trying to survive humiliation. She even started missing a few days at work, letting her assistant tell everyone she needed time to process. It wasn't hard to play the role. Exhaustion came naturally. But when she disappeared from her office, she wasn't hiding at home. She was downtown, meeting a man who had every reason to dislike Evan Holt. Gavin Pierce was the accountant for Evan's firm, the kind of person everyone underestimated until they needed numbers to stay clean. He had a dry sense of humor and no loyalty to partners who treated staff like furniture. When Lena asked for a private meeting, he didn't hesitate. They met in a quiet cafe far from the financial district, a place where no one from the firm would be seen. Over black coffee, Gavin leaned forward and said, "You didn't hear this from me." Then he showed her a file, thin but dangerous. Inside were printouts, financial transfers, signatures, and property liens that didn't make sense. Evan had signed documents pledging architectural assets, design portfolios and blueprints Lena had produced, as collateral for a client's development. It was illegal, reckless, and easily provable. She read each page slowly, her fingers steady even when her pulse wasn't. "He used my work," she said softly. Gavin only nodded. He didn't think anyone would notice. By the time she left the cafe, her grief had settled into something sharper. She walked home through the chill wind, the city lights bouncing off wet sidewalks, her heels striking in rhythm with her thoughts. She could almost hear his laugh in her head again, the one from the office, the one that used to haunt her at night. But now it sounded different, smaller somehow. Back in her apartment, she spread the papers across the table. The signatures were clear, the violations undeniable. Every line was a thread she could pull, one that could unravel his entire career if tugged just right. She traced the edge of the documents with her fingertip and let out a quiet, humorless breath that could almost pass for a laugh. Weeks of silence, pity, and whispers had finally paid off. Everyone thought she was broken. Evan thought she was finished. But while they watched her crumble, she'd been laying the foundation for something else entirely. For the first time in what felt like forever, her mouth curved into a real smile. It wasn't joy, it was recognition. She finally had something worth keeping secret. Lena waited 3 days before sending him a message. The words were careful, soft, the kind that made her sound small again. I just want to talk once for closure. I think I need it to move on. Evan replied within minutes, agreeing to meet. He even added a smiley face, like he was humoring a child. They met at the restaurant where they used to celebrate anniversaries. The waiter still recognized them and hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should mention it. Evan filled the silence by bragging about his new projects, the firm's growth, and the fresh energy Tessa brought to his life. He wore a new watch, one she could tell was bought with their joint money. His confidence filled the space between them like smoke. Lena smiled weakly, keeping her voice quiet, her hands folded on the table. I just want this to be easy, she said. No fighting, no drama. Maybe I can just sign what you need. She looked down at her drink, playing the part perfectly. Evan's grin widened. That's the smart move, Lena. We both deserve peace. You'll be fine. You always land on your feet. He didn't notice the small recording device tucked into her purse, hidden under a napkin. Every word came through clearly, his voice calm and arrogant. She asked about the finances, pretending she didn't understand the paperwork. I saw transfers, she said softly. Did you move money from the joint account? Maybe I misunderstood. Evan waved a hand, dismissive. You don't need to worry about that. I moved some funds around so they wouldn't get tied up later. You'll get your share. His tone was casual, careless. Then, without realizing it, he kept talking about the creative ways he'd used assets to secure deals, about how technically her name was on some of them, but nobody would trace it. She nodded as if she didn't understand, keeping her eyes low. Inside, she was memorizing every word. The confession was falling out of him like loose change, each sentence another piece of the puzzle she needed. When the check arrived, Evan reached for it dramatically, still playing the generous man. I've got it, he said. Consider this my last act of kindness. She thanked him quietly, and for a second, she thought he actually believed she was grateful. He leaned back, smug and satisfied, saying, You know, you could have made this messy. I'm glad you didn't. Lena smiled, just enough to be polite. I'm glad too, she said. They walked out together, the cool air hitting them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. He offered her a half-hearted hug, then left with that same confident stride. She watched him go, her expression unreadable. Back in her car, she pulled the device from her bag and replayed the sound of his voice admitting everything. The recording was crystal clear. For the first time in months, her heartbeat felt steady. She finally had proof, and he had no idea. Miles arrived at her apartment one evening with a flash drive and a careful look on his face. You said you wanted to make it count, he told her, setting the drive on the table. Inside were documents he had gathered, bank records, emails, contracts bearing Evan's signature. Each one linked to transactions that violated both firm policy and federal law. Lena opened the files one by one, reading them until her eyes ached. By the time she finished, the next step had already formed in her mind. There was a journalist she'd been following for months, someone who wrote about financial crimes in high places. Her articles were sharp, detailed, and impossible to ignore. Miles found a secure way to reach her without leaving a trail. The message they sent was short, direct, and anonymous. It included just enough evidence to spark curiosity, with the promise of more if she could keep the source hidden. 2 days passed before the reporter replied. The email simply said, I'm listening. That was all Lena needed. She sent the rest in stages, copies of wire transfers, internal memos, and scanned pages that showed how firm money had quietly drifted into personal accounts. Every document told a story of greed. She attached nothing that could lead back to her. Then she waited. On the 4th morning, the headline appeared on every local site. Chicago law firm partner accused of misconduct and asset diversion. The article was detailed, precise, impossible to deny. It mentioned the firm by name, and though it didn't name Evan directly, the descriptions were clear enough for anyone in their circle to recognize. By noon, phones were buzzing across the legal community. By evening, his firm issued a public statement about an internal review. Miles called her that night. He's in panic mode, he said. They've locked his accounts for auditing. She didn't reply right away. She was watching the news on mute, her face unreadable. While Evan scrambled to contain the mess, Lena worked quietly on her own project. She had been meeting with an investor, someone who'd once been one of Evan's clients, a man who respected her designs long before her husband took credit for them. He remembered her precision and ideas, not her silence. When she presented her plan for a small but independent architecture firm, he didn't hesitate. I've been waiting for you to do this, he said, signing the papers without blinking. By the end of the week, Lena's new company was registered. She named it simply, after her grandmother, nothing that tied back to the past. The funding cleared, the office space was chosen, and her designs were finally her own again. Meanwhile, Evan's face had disappeared from firm events. Rumors spread about investigations, about frozen assets and missing files. Lena didn't gloat. She went back to her drafting table, turned off her phone, and kept working. For the first time, every piece on the board was moving her way. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where lives are quietly dismantled. Evan arrived first, wearing his favorite charcoal suit and that same self-assured grin she'd seen the day he handed her the papers. He nodded at familiar faces from the firm who had come to support him, as if this was another easy win in his career. Tessa sat in the back row, pretending to look calm but gripping her purse too tightly. Lena entered with her lawyer, a quiet man named Dalton Price, whose calm presence made people underestimate him. She didn't look at Evan. She didn't need to. She simply sat down, organized her notes, and waited. Evan's attorney started the proceedings smoothly, painting him as a dedicated professional whose estranged wife was being overly emotional about financial misunderstanding. Evan even managed a faint chuckle when her name came up, leaning back like he already knew how it would end. Then Dalton stood. His tone stayed polite, almost detached, as he asked permission to introduce additional materials into evidence. He laid a series of files on the judge's desk, bank statements, notarized contracts, and a small recording device. "This," he said evenly, "contains a conversation between Mr. Holt and my client, in which he admits to moving joint funds and using her intellectual property without authorization." Evan straightened in his chair, the smile faltering. The judge adjusted her glasses and pressed play. The courtroom filled with Evan's voice, casual, confident, damning. The words rolled out clearly, every arrogant detail about creative accounting, and nobody tracing it. When it ended, the silence was heavy enough to crush air. The judge looked at him sharply. "Mr. Holt, is this your voice?" He tried to answer but stumbled, his face losing color as Dalton placed more documents on the table. Evidence of the illegal collateral agreement surfaced next, complete with his signature and time stamps. Tessa's head dropped into her hand. The judge called for a brief recess, reviewing the material with visible disbelief. When she returned, her tone was cold. "Mr. Holt," she said, "this court has rarely seen such deliberate misconduct within a marital estate. Your actions were deceptive and unethical." Dalton didn't gloat. He simply handed over the last page, proof that Lena's designs had been used unlawfully in his deed. The judge signed an order transferring full ownership of those works to her and granting a substantial financial settlement. Evan didn't look up. His attorney whispered something, but he wasn't listening. His hands were trembling. Lena finally spoke, her voice steady and quiet. "You taught me how to fight dirty," she said, meeting his eyes for the first time since that day in her office. "I just learned faster." The judge struck the gavel once, and it was over. Evan's world cracked in silence, while Lena walked out without turning back. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of the hearing, Evan's name appeared in every legal newsletter across the city. The same firm that once displayed his portrait in the lobby now released a brief statement announcing his temporary suspension pending review. Everyone knew what that meant. He was finished. Colleagues began to distance themselves overnight. Calls went unanswered, partnerships dissolved quietly, and invitations vanished. The law community in Chicago thrived on reputation, and his was now radioactive. By the end of the week, his office was cleared out. His nameplate disappeared from the door, leaving only a faint outline on the glass. Tessa tried to stand by him at first. She showed up during the early chaos, whispering reassurances about getting through this together. But when she realized the accounts were frozen, the firm had terminated his access, and the media kept digging, her devotion began to fade. Within a month, she was gone too, moved out, changed her number, and returned to another firm under her maiden name. Evan was left in a rented apartment that smelled of takeout and defeat. Lena didn't speak of any of it. She heard bits and pieces through coworkers and mutual acquaintances who assumed she'd want updates. She didn't. She just nodded politely, changed the subject, and went back to work. The satisfaction came not from the gossip, but from silence, the kind that let her rebuild in peace. Her own firm was growing faster than she had expected. New clients came in through referrals, and her designs were finally being recognized under her name alone. When her accountant mentioned she had more liquid capital than she was using, she knew exactly what she wanted to do with it. There was a building she used to walk past on her way to work, a sleek, glass-front condo downtown. Years ago, Evan had pointed it out, saying it was his kind of place. He had even laughed, telling her she wouldn't fit in with that crowd. The memory had stung then. Now it just made her smile. 2 weeks later, she stood in that same lobby, signing closing papers. The payment cleared in full, no mortgage, no negotiations. Just cash. The realtor beamed, congratulating her on the purchase. Lena thanked him politely and asked when she could move in. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, she stepped into the space Evan had once called too good for her. The view stretched across the skyline, the city glowing below like a promise she'd finally kept to herself. She set her keys on the marble counter, looking out at the lights flickering in the distance. No one knew, and she preferred it that way. There was no revenge speech, no victory toast, just quiet ownership. The kind that needed no audience. Somewhere across town, Evan Holt was probably still trying to fix the ruins of his life. Lena didn't care. The city was hers again, and for the first time, she actually belonged. The new place felt nothing like the home she once shared. It smelled of fresh paint and eucalyptus, quiet and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city lights. A few close friends gathered around the dining table that evening, the air warm with laughter and clinking glasses. They were people who had seen her vanish and return stronger, co-workers, an old college friend, and Miles, who insisted on bringing dessert instead of wine. They toasted her first major contract, a downtown redevelopment project that bore her firm's name alone. Plates were passed, stories shared, but not once did anyone mention Evan or the wreckage he'd left behind. It was as if he'd never existed, erased by time and determination. Lena laughed easily, the sound surprising even her. For the first time in years, she wasn't pretending. After everyone left, she stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the street below. The city was quiet at this hour, just the hum of distant traffic and the flicker of streetlight. She thought about how far she had come without ever needing to raise her voice. Everything she'd lost had made room for this: peace, independence, and a view that didn't come with conditions. Sometime after midnight, the intercom buzzed sharply. She frowned, not expecting anyone. When she answered, a slurred voice echoed through the speaker. "Lena, please, just talk to me." She didn't have to ask who it was. The sound of his voice was unmistakable, though weaker now, stripped of the easy arrogance it once carried. She pressed the button to let him up, not out of forgiveness but curiosity. Moments later, a knock came at the door. Evan stood there, eyes red, hair unkempt, suit wrinkled. He smelled like whiskey and regret. "You were right," he muttered. "Everything fell apart. They turned on me. She left. I made a mess of everything." Lena leaned against the doorframe, saying nothing. He reached out, his voice breaking. "We can fix it, Len. We were good once, weren't we? You still care, I know you do." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression calm, unshaken. There was no anger left in her, no satisfaction either, just understanding that this was the end. "You had your turn laughing," she said quietly. "Now it's my turn to live." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, thick and final. She stepped back inside, closing the door gently. The latch clicked, sharp and clean. On the other side, his footsteps faded down the hall. Inside, Lena turned off the lights and walked to the window again. The city still glowed, indifferent to old stories. She watched it for a while, then smiled faintly. The night was hers now, and it didn't need witnesses. Months passed quietly, marked not by chaos but by growth. Lena's firm had flourished, its name now appearing on design boards and project bids across the city. Late nights at her drafting table no longer felt lonely, they felt alive. The project that had once been dismissed as too ambitious was now complete, a revitalized riverfront that blended modern design with green space. It had become the talk of Chicago's architecture scene. When the invitation arrived for the Urban Innovation Awards, Lena almost laughed. She had forgotten what recognition felt like. The ceremony was held in a grand hall downtown, the same kind of place she used to attend as someone's +1. Now, her name was printed on the program as a nominee. She stood backstage, calm and composed, while the announcer read the shortlist. When her project was declared the winner, the applause rolled through the room like a soft wave. She walked to the stage, accepting the award with a grace that came from surviving more than failure. The lights were warm on her face, and for a moment she saw her reflection in the gold surface of the trophy, steady, unshaken, finally her own person. Her speech was brief. She thanked her mentors, her design team, the community that believed in the project. Her words were thoughtful but restrained, avoiding sentimentality. She didn't mention Evan. She didn't need to. The silence of his absence was louder than any acknowledgement could have been. Across the city, in a dim motel room with peeling wallpaper and a flickering screen, Evan watched the live stream. He sat hunched over, the sound low, eyes fixed on her image. The contrast was cruel, her standing tall under bright lights while he faded into the background of his own mistakes. The news ticker beneath the broadcast even mentioned her firm's rapid rise and her innovative leadership. His jaw tightened, but there was nothing left to fight. On stage, Lena's voice carried through the speakers. "Sometimes losing everything," she said, pausing just long enough for the audience to lean in, "is how you find your real self." The crowd applauded again, unaware of the private story behind the line. After the ceremony, she walked alone through the cool night air. The streets shimmered with the reflection of city lights on wet pavement, the hum of traffic blending with the quiet rhythm of her heels. She passed the buildings that had once felt unreachable, now simply part of her path. When she reached the bridge overlooking the river, she stopped for a moment, resting the award against her side. The water below caught the city's reflection, fluid, changing, alive. She smiled faintly, the same calm confidence that had carried her through every silent battle now settled in her eye. He had laughed once, thinking she would crumble. But standing there, with the skyline shining before her, she knew the truth. He wasn't laughing anymore. Hey besties, thanks for sticking with me till the end of this wild story. Imagine your husband laughing while handing you divorce papers, only for you to turn the tables and walk away stronger than ever. Lena lost everything but came back unstoppable. Sometimes karma just needs a little planning, right? If you liked this one, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.